Hello and welcome. So in this video we will set up Django on Docker and we'll run our database as well as Django from Docker Compose. So let's get started. And step towards setting up Django containerized, to set up an orchestration tool for Django. After this video, we will jump toward ECS, Elastic Container Service, to deploy our Docker container on ECR, that is Elastic Container Registry, and then use it for ECS. So this is to build a production ready setup using some container tools. Okay, so let's start with Django Dockerization first. There are two things especially. One is Docker file and then Docker Compose. The goal of this video is to set up Docker on Django and to configure MySQL or Postgres and configure it in our Docker Compose file and then running it as a simple surface. And then we will make a differentiation between how to run in a production environment and how to run in development environment, so that in next videos we can move forward to ECS, that is Elastic Container Service by the AWS. Okay, so what we will do is we will deploy our Docker image into ECR, okay, after the video. So let's do it. So first discuss the files that we will build throughout the video. So first is Docker file. So Docker file contains the image. So to keep the image very light, I'm not using some Ubuntu image but using the Python image directly. So let's take the version 3.10, although 3.11 is out. So let's take Python 3.10, and we need to add few things, like in this file we will copy the requirements file, we'll copy the let's take the whole project on which we are working. So let's say the name of the project is blog, so we'll copy that as well. Then we will run few commands. So we'll run the commands to configure our virtual environment, venv, etc. And in the end we want to add user, because we don't want to run our Docker container as root. We want to run it as some new user. So let's say the name of that user is Django user, and then we want to give this user access of our content, and in the end we will switch the user. So the whole file, this whole Docker file will help us to set up Django service on Docker. Okay, and then we will configure the Docker Compose file. So Docker Compose will be in YAML format. First, after noting down the version, we come to services. This is a very important section. In services we add two things. One is app and one is DB, let's say for the database. This app will actually use our idea from here. Okay, so it will contains the Docker file information. So Docker file will be this file itself, this one, and it will contain some arguments. Let's say we want to pass the argument dev, the dev equals to true for development environment, because as I told you in very beginning that we want to differentiate between the production environment and between the development environment. Okay, then we can have the commands like Gunicon. So this I am saying for production when this is false. So we can use command Gunicon your project, let's say blog, and then VASCI, then application, then bind to whatever port you like, most probably the 8000, right? So the Gunicorn or Gunicon will run your Django project, okay, within this Docker Compose file. Then we can set up some environment etc as well. But one more one most important thing is this app will depend on DB. And what is this DB? This DB is the same. the another service which is actually our Postgres service or MySQL service. So let's say if I'm taking an image of MySQL of, let's say, version 8, okay, and I'm saying that environment here is and mentioning like in MySQL we have the MySQL root password is, let's say, root password, some password we are giving it, and we are specifying the volumes here for persistent storage. So let's say my db, and in the case of MySQL it is where lib MySQL, and then we need to define the volumes. So that will be simple volume and the name of the volume, that is mydb. So these are just notation, but the very important, the crucial point here is not these things, but the thing that we have a service which is app. So this is for your Docker, very important, and this db, this is for your Postgres or MySQL. So this is for your database, right? And Docker Compose file will help us to run both of these things in one go. Okay, so we just need to do Docker compose up. So by this command we'll be able to directly run our Django. Okay, sometimes what happens is we need to run few commands, and we need to run these commands within our Docker, right, container. So what we have to do is we need to write Docker compose and run. This run will come, okay, this app, okay, because since this is Django command, so we will specify that this is for service app, and we want let's say we want to run the bash script, so we can say ssc, and then we need to write python manage.py start app, or whatever the app name is, let's say core. So this is the idea. So we are saying Docker compose run in the service app for the bash script, and the command python manage.py start app, the name of the app, right? So this is how you can run a command in your Docker. Okay, so this is not neat, but I guess you understand the idea. Okay, so let's start with the video. So first thing is to build this Docker file, second is to build this Docker compose which contains these two services, and then we will see how we proceed. One important point that I want to highlight here once again is this part, that is volume. So we are just mentioning that my volume is mydb, and just we define it here, volume mydb. And one most important point is don't expose a port for service to service communication. So like don't expose your port here. You want, let's say this is if MySQL, so don't say this is 3306, because this is service to service. We are not accessing the database from outside, so that this is not required. Okay, or if you do something like, let's say 3306 to 3366, then this will be trickier to manage if or you have to pass this in settings.py of Django directly, right? So like I have told you everything that we will do here other than environment variable. So we will come to these things in this environment variable section. Okay, so let's start writing some code here. So this is our Django project. So I've seen most of the times in many blogs, etc., that they create Docker file here only, but I think like all the DevOps part should go into a separate folder. So let's do it. So we'll create a new folder, DevOps, and inside this folder let's create a new file, that is Docker compose, or I can say first let's do with the Docker file, right? So Docker file, here the path to be, I mean the path is to be right, so that's important. Okay, so I will tell you how to do so. So first is from Python, so we are using the Python image with 3.10, let's say 0.8. You can use the latest version. Then you need to add that you have the environment, that is Python buffered. one. What it do is it prevents from setting up like some psych file, etc. Okay, then we go to copy. We need to copy our this blog folder. Okay, so we'll say copy the blog, and the blog should contain the requirement.txt. so requirement.txt into some file temp requirement.txt. okay, so this is what I'm doing here. This is from the Docker, and this is from our blog containing the requirement.txt file. So currently it is not containing, but I will create one. So I guess what I can do is I need to create one file here, that is requirement.txt. okay, and this should be inside the blog, not inside the account. So move this one out. So here, as you can see, we have the requirement.txt. So for now, let's say it contains Django and Gunicon. I have written few lines for Docker file. So we are using the Python, and we have the Python buffered1, and in this we are copying the blog. Under the blog we have the requirements.txt. we are using this not here, yeah, we are using this requirement.txt file, and copying this file to our temp file, which is inside of our Docker, right? Then we are doing the same for our, if let's say we have the requirements dev.txt. so for that, let's make it underscore instead of dot as well. So this is for dev environment, and copy the same thing here. For now we don't need actually unicorn in the case of dev, but let it be for a while. Then we are copying the blog folder, and we are moving it to blog. Then work directory is blog, exposing the 8000 port, dev is false for now. We are saying that python m virtual environment at location py. So we are actually, this is in the very base, we are making the py folder for and making it virtual environment. Then we are upgrading the pip, and then we are installing the requirement.txt from temp. okay, now once everything has been installed, we can remove the temp, right? And we don't need the, we can remove the temp. We add a new user, that is Django user, with password disabled, without creating any home directory. okay, the Django user is the name, and we provide access to our blog folder to this Django user inside Django user group. okay, so we are changing the ownership. We are setting the environment variable path and making the user Django user at the very end. So what it do is the Docker file will run as this Django user. okay, so let's run it. So currently our location of this Docker file is in DevOps folder, but our project resides in this blog. okay, so what we have to do is we have to be in blog, or you can go back and say Docker build, then the file, location of the file. So location of the file is this. So copy the full path, paste it here, which don't forget to add a dot here. So as you can see, everything is working fine. Why I'm saying this file location, I'm giving this file location because otherwise the path will mess up. okay, because we are using the path here with the under the blog section, we are going to blog folder. That's why I was one directory back. So these things are important when you are actually modifying the file location of Docker file location. okay, once this is done, we will set up the Docker Compose file. So let's start with that as well. Docker compose.yml. Here you can see now the virtual environment installing, and yes, so everything is done. So let's go back to building this Docker Compose file as well. So we have built the Docker file, everything was just smooth. okay, so let's do it for Docker Compose file. Alright, so we have the Docker Compose file. Now we are specifying our services here, and currently we only have one service, that is the app service. App will run the Docker of Django. okay, and we are saying the context is dot, the arguments with the environment being true, development environment being true, with the port 8000, with the volume mapping, and the command, that is our simple command manage.py run server. Very important thing here is we are passing the context. The context is from where to run this image. Okay, so I mean this will not work. Why? Let's see this part so that you can understand. So make sure like our Docker Compose is in DevOps folders, but we are in this base directory, so we have to go there as well. Okay, so Docker Compose, then the file location. The file location is this, so I'm copying the path, pasting it here, and then I'm saying that please build it. And this is the case. Now we are getting the error. The error is that copy is not working. The simple command, this Docker file is here, that blog requirement.txt, these things are not working. For this to be fixed, we need to change the context. As you can see, currently we are in this path, so we need to go back once so that we can come into the root directory. So do this, and then we need to add the Docker file as well. So we can mention the Docker file, which is at DevOps and then Docker file. Okay, so inside the DevOps folder we have the Docker file. This is what I'm saying. So let's try and build it again. Docker Compose, the file name, the path, I mean the file flag and the path, and then build command. So let's hit it. Now it was able to cache the things. Now it is installing the virtual environment, etc. And then this is, I mean, working, right? Then I can just say again, instead of build, I can just do up, and I guess this is running smooth. We need to import the crispy forms and add unicorn as well. So I think these things should suffice. Okay, let's build again. Now we have the updated requirement.txt. So these error help us like to resolve the things. Perfect. Now run. Understanding, and now this is running at this location. If I open it, and this must, my blog website is running here. Okay, with the help of Docker. Everything is working fine, except we don't have the database configured yet. So this is the part 2 of the video, where we will add new app, I mean new service, that is DB service. Okay, and we'll configure that as well. So currently, as I told you, we are in this portion now. Okay, so now we have the second service here, that is the DB service, which is using the Postgres 13 Alpine image, with the volumes being these things: var, lib, Postgres data, and some environment. So var, lib, Postgres SQL data, this is the path where the data resides, and we want to capture it in volumes. Okay, and this dev db data, we have defined it into the volume section here. Okay, and some environment variables like Postgres DB, user, and password. So if I come to this, we have this Postgres Alpine image, right? And here it says like what are the variables that we can configure, like Postgres user, Postgres DB, these things we are using here: Postgres DB, Postgres user, etc. Right? And we have the data here in this directory. That's what I'm using here: var, lib, Postgres SQL data. So you can always go back to hub.docker.com with this path, and you will be able to locate these things. Okay? This is here, right? So now, one thing here to note is we have our service set up with Docker Compose. Now we need to add one more thing, like our app is this is our Django, and this is our database, that is Postgres, and this Django app depends on this. Okay, so this Django can't run without DB. Okay, so we need to add this field, that is depends on, and depends on what? DB, right? This is our DB. There you go. We need to configure this into our Django as well. So for that we will need psychopg2. I mean we need to integrate this in our Django. For that we need an adapter so that Django can communicate with our database service. So let's come to the Docker file and we need to install the psychopg2. So I've added the psychopg2 in our requirements .txt and development requirement, both files. And we have this Docker Compose where we are saying that the database is Postgres Alpine. One thing to note is, let's say if you would have been using Python Alpine file, then you need these dependencies. Okay, so what we are doing is, if we go to this page, it will tell us that psychopg2 have some need some system dependencies as well. For that we need to install those, and once we are done with installing the requirement.txt, we can remove those build things, we can delete those things. Okay, so these are for temporary purpose so that psychopg2 adapter could have been installed if we would have been using the Alpine image. But since this is not Alpine, we can just ignore these things and go directly. Okay, so I don't need this as well, and hit it. Now now we can see we have added psychopg2 here, we have added the docker image here. So one thing we need to make sure is in our settings file we need some changes, right? So let's come to settings so that Django can communicate to Postgres instead of SQLite. So go to settings.py file. Here if I come to the database, I have been using db SQLite, so now I don't need this, so delete this, and we create a new database, the default database. Okay, so for this first, okay, so I've added the import OS package, and here we have the database. So in the database we are saying the default is with the engine PostgreSQL with the host name, user and password, our db host name, user and password that we have defined in Docker Compose file. But we need to pass these environment variables in our these database variables actually are same to these things. Okay, so db host will come here, which is db, so the host will become db, and this db is this is very important point, right? So we are passing the host db, we are passing a service db here. We are not saying localhost, we are not saying RDS or something, some address. We are saying this db service to be passed. Then the name, user, password, etc. in the debug field. You can configure the debug here by os.environment.get, right? But for now let's jump to quickly try to run this and let's see what happens. So Docker Compose build. Now it is trying to install the psychopg2, and I think this is started psychopg2 installation, and okay, this is done, and yes, I think everything runs smooth. And now if I do Docker Compose up, now it is for database, right? And there is some error. So it is saying that this port is not working. So why is this happening? Even though our now there are two things, one is app container and one is database container. So app is asking for database, but database is not yet running. So this is the question. What happens is I mean this is very important, that in this point we have told that this app depends on database. Okay, let me come here. We have told that app depends on database. So I just service this is done by the Docker, but what happens is, even though app, let's say app starts at t equal to 1 second, but app waits for service to be started. So let's say service was started at t equal to 0 second. But what happens is Django runs faster. So Django, let's say, take 1 second only to get started. So let's say if Django is starting at 1, so it will be started by 2 second, or let's say database take 5 second to get started. So after this, what happens is Django will ask where is database, but database is in the state of starting, right? It is not started yet, but it is in the state of booting up. So for this time the error will come that TCP connection not found or unable to connect to database, etc., right? So this is a crucial point. Even though we have added this depends on field, but this depends on only says that service should run first. It is not saying that database will become up. Okay, I mean service should run first is not equal to that database also runs first, because database takes time to be started, and for this we need to add a new command into our Django project, that is wait for DB. Okay, so there are multiple ways to do so, but we will add a new command into our manage, like we do python manage.py run server. Similarly, we will add a new command, and this command will be added into a new app, which is the core app, and we'll make a new folder there, that is migration management folder. And inside the management folder we will define the two files, one is init file and the another is this wait for DB file. So this will use .check, which is provided by Django, to fetch any error if there is any. Okay, so if there is any error, this self.check will returns us that yes, please correct the error, there is something silly going on here. Okay, so let's do this as well. So what we have to do is we have to create a new app. So app will create a new file. So I'm in the blog, we have the core created, so I don't need views etc. here, so I can delete the views. And here let's create a new folder, which is management folder, and inside the management folder let's create another folder which is commands. So this is recommended way of creating new commands, and here we will add a new file, that is init.py, and we will add another file which is wait for DB. Okay, so what wait for DB will do is it will actually check whether our service is running or not. So let's do it. Import time, then let's make class command. So this will be from base command, and the base command comes from django.core.management.base import base command. Okay, and inside this, and our favorite, which is options. Okay, and we will use the self dot stdout, and we want to write onto the terminal that we are waiting for database to be started. Okay, and we'll say db up, this is a flag db up, which is false currently, and we'll say while db up is false, try out something which is self.check that I told you about, and we want to pass database here, databases to be equal to default, because name is default in the database. If you see in our settings file, so we have database default. Okay, even database is equal to default, right? And if everything is fine, then we will turn it to true, else a try will fail, it will return an exception. So accept any exception ig. So we'll print this exception e here, and we'll say self dot stdout dot write database not started yet, trying in 2 seconds. So we'll try again in 2 seconds. So we'll say time dot, that's our imported time, sleep for 2 seconds. Okay, if this while loop is done and we comes out of this while loop, then that is good, and we will write self dot stdout dot write, and we will write in green, so we need to use self dot style dot success and database available. So we can say database is running. Okay, something like this. So let's hit it. So this is our command, which is wait for db command, because we have this wait for db. Okay, now we want to add this in our Docker Compose. So what you can do is we can use this command before. We can say python manage.py wait for db. So this should run before restarting the server, right? And one more thing here, we have added a new app, so we want to add this in our installed apps as well. So let's add this core app here as well. So this is done. Now build the image again, build the Docker Compose again. So there you go. So it's installing the things, and like I will figure this out as well, why it it should not import again and again. We will come to these points, and now there you go, we have resolved the error. Now you can see we are getting like the running the database is running. So initially it was not started, but then it went and work ahead. So I want to add one more thing here, because the migration are applied. So I can come to Docker Compose and add one more line here after wait for db, and before run server, I can say python manage.py migrate, right? There you go. And again if I say up, and there you go. Now the migrations have been applied and everything is working fine. So this is it. So you can see here we have two things, db and app. This is what I told you in very beginning, that we will be having two services. One is db, this one, and one is app. And the wait for db, what it is doing and everything. Now you understand the relation between Docker and Docker Compose, and why we need wait for db. So this is it from this. See you in another video. Thanks a lot.